Hey everyone, it's me Flippy. I've been a long-time content creator in the Saints Row community, making videos since the very first game. I've seen the rise, I've seen the fall, but today I'm going to share with you the most tragic story of it all. This is the story behind the Saints Row 2 patch and why it means so much to the Saints Row community. Saints Row, if you don't know, started out as a humble street gang-themed open-world crime game with a character creator and an emphasis on side activities. It was an Xbox 360 exclusive, so it didn't exactly make waves in the larger gaming community, but it sold well enough that the publisher THQ wanted to up the budget for the sequel, Saints Row 2. And up the budget they did, a completely overhauled and expanded map with an epic story, an amazing soundtrack with 170 licensed songs, co-op, multiplayer, Easter eggs out the wazoo, thousands of custom animation nodes, more weapons, more vehicles, more everything. It's one of the most well-designed open-world games ever made, and held to be the best Saints Row game in the series by longtime fans. In addition to the 360, this time the game would be ported to the PS3 and PC. But when Saints Row 2 was ported to the PC by CD Projekt, they did a terrible job to say the least. Some even call it the worst PC port of all time. Plagued with so many glitches, the game is barely playable. One of the more infamous design flaws is that the game clock speed is still locked to the Xbox 360 CPU, which has a specific clock speed of 3.2 GHz. Meaning if you have a CPU that runs at anything other than that, the game runs at double, even triple the speed. Needless to say, like many other outsourced PC ports, this was a hack job. Typically when a game is this broken, it's often abandoned by both the publisher and the players alike. But for some dedicated Saints Row fans, a shoddy port wasn't going to stand in the way of fun. Mike Watson, aka Idle Ninja, was a really passionate fan of Saints Row 2. This dude was everywhere. Something Awful, Face Punch, Steam, and of course the Penny Arcade forums. Mike was in about every Saints Row thread around the internet, always there to help someone get the game running. He loved it that much, and he wanted to share that experience with as many people as he could because he thought Saints Row 2 was that great of a game. He took it upon himself to track down what caused crashes, tweak the game for better balance and performance, helped find a fix for the speed-up bug, and created a bundle of his and all the best community mods and fixes so that it was easy for anyone to get the game running. A little package called Gentlemen of the Row. This not only fixed the game, but gave it a crazy amount of extra content and enhanced quality of life. And now that the game was becoming more playable, more people were joining in the effort to help make Saints Row 2 even better. Thomas Jepp, aka Minimal, would help Mike co-create SaintsRowMods.com. Together they would foster the modding community and continue to grow with the release of Saints Row 3. Eventually, Mike's efforts even caught the attention of the Saints Row developers at Volition, and he was rewarded with a job offer in 2014. He was now the official community manager for Saints Row, and he was awesome. The best era of Volition by far was with him, and it wasn't because of their games. It was because Mike was that cool of a guy. He made the community feel more like a family. He knew the fandom inside and out, and he always took the time to make sure all of our voices were heard and our concerns were addressed. And after the release of Saints Row 3, one of those growing concerns among the community was that Saints Row was becoming, well, less like Saints Row. See, after Saints Row 2, the publisher THQ was on death's door. They paid a ton of money for the rights to license games for kids, and their investments were flopping hard by 2009 because by that point, kids were more interested in the rise of smartphone games. They lost a lot of money with those licensing deals, on top of that dumbass U-Draw tablet that no one bought, and as a result, Saints Row 3 was poised to have a smaller budget than Saints Row 2. And the content and theme of the game was changed to try and gain wider appeal. Less dramatic and serious overtones, more silly and over the top. The game became more streamlined. Rather than spread all the content out in the open world, the gameplay became more centered around the campaign, more accessible for casual gamers. THQ was counting on Saints Row 3 to be a mega hit to save their dying company, and in the process, changed the direction of Saints Row forever. It didn't really matter because a year later, THQ filed for bankruptcy, and Volition, along with the Saints Row IP, were sold off together to the UK-based publisher, Deep Silver. I bring all this up because for some of us in the Saints Row community, this dramatic shift in style was drastic enough that it just didn't feel like Saints Row anymore. Saints Row 2 sort of marks the end of the real open-world gangster-based series. I've made countless videos on this topic if you want a deeper dive into all that, but to sum it all up, it felt like Saints Row jumped the shark. Things were just too different. And then of course Saints Row 4 happens, and that's basically a different game altogether wearing Saints Row's skin. Saints Row 2 really does feel like the last game of its kind, and it's trapped forever on a lousy PC port. It always felt like Volition was indifferent to how the OG fans felt about this, and this disconnect created a lot of animosity towards them from fans who supported the game since the beginning. It felt like we were getting left behind now that the game finally hit more mainstream success. But Mike Watson was always sympathetic to us in the community who missed this older style. Hell, he missed it too. That's sort of how I met Mike. He liked my wishlist videos and left me some kind comments about them. He added me on Skype one day, and we'd chat occasionally over the years. One of the things Mike was always hopeful for was a proper working fix for Saints Row 2. Saints Row Power Tools and Gentlemen of the Row offered some of the more critical fixes, but it wasn't perfect, and not everyone could get it working. The hoops you have to jump through for co-op and multiplayer are too much of a hassle for most people, and the DLC missions that have critical pieces of lore are unplayable. To really fix Saints Row 2, that would mean obtaining the source code. But after Mike joined Volition, he discovered that the source code was lost. Volition didn't do a very good job archiving anything back then. They were constantly throwing stuff away, and no one had any idea where it was. For a while, it seemed like Saints Row 2 would forever remain a broken masterpiece. But Mike never gave up. Throughout the years in his spare time, he would trace down any lead he could for information on the whereabouts of the source code. And in May of 2019, his efforts finally paid off. After a series of phone calls, somebody contacted Mike to let him know that they found it. Apparently, it had been sitting on an old CD Projekt server all this time. Mike immediately proposed the Saints Row 2 patch to the higher-ups at Volition, and it was approved with Mike being assigned as the project manager. At long last, Saints Row 2 was going to have a working port. Co-op, multiplayer, expansions, stability. There were even plans to include the Gentlemen of the Row UGC, so more weapons, vehicles, and cheats. Mike then contacted his longtime Saints Row mods collaborator, Thomas Jepp, aka Minimal, and offered him some contract work to fix the game. Thomas had a lot of experience working with the more technical side of Saints Row 2 already. He wrote a lot of the tools that were used to aid the support of modding, and even helped out Volition before to fix their social service, MySteelport. At this point, Mike and Thomas had been collaborators for nearly 10 years. They co-created SaintsRowMods.com together, and it seemed like he was the perfect man for the job. The community fixed Saints Row 2 the first time, and it was going to do it again on an official level. Around June of 2019, Mike contacted me and fellow Saints Row YouTuber Mr. Saints Godzilla 21 and asked us to write up a document on all the bugs that plagued Saints Row 2, and to give our input for how to further enhance the game's quality of life. For example, I wrote about how the adjacent tap cycle quick switching feels less intuitive than the free control of Saints Row 1, and should be an optional choice in the controller menu instead. Nerdy stuff like that will never actually make it into the patch, but I'm sure everyone will appreciate my effort. Godzilla and I are glitch aficionados, so we went to town documenting all the bugs we could. This is going to sound corny as hell, but it was kind of a beautiful moment in my Saints Row career. I met Godzilla early on through YouTube back around 2011. We bonded over how broken Saints Row 3 was, teamed up to find all kinds of glitches to make videos about, and we've been best bros ever since. And now, we're working with the legendary Idle Ninja to use our glitch hunting skills together in an official capacity to help fix our favorite Saints Row game? Guys, for a short moment of time in my life, I was actually happy. This document we submitted was called Saints Row 2 Project Unfucked, and right before we submitted it, we changed the title at the last minute because we thought it was too stupid and unprofessional. And then get this, shortly after that, someone at Deep Silver proposed they call the patch Saints Row 2 Unfucked Edition, and it was approved. That is the actual name for the project internally. Mike eventually invited me and Godzilla to a playtest group where we would all get to play early builds of the patch for further testing. Shortly after that, in October of 2019, Thomas was flown from the UK to the Volition Studios in Champaign, Illinois, and a live stream was held to publicly announce the patch on Saints Row 2's 11th anniversary. Things were so optimistic during this time. Mike was hopeful that the patch would be out in a few months. He even thought about having a public beta out by that Christmas of 2019. But after that announcement stream, things got eerily quiet. Weeks went by without a playtest build, then months, and we were kind of left in the dark as to why. I mean, game development is complicated, and this was just a two-man team. But there was a bit more to it. Well, the story as I know it is that Minimal, aka Thomas Jepp, ghosted Mike not long after he returned to the UK. He didn't contact Mike for weeks, took the money, and then had nothing to show for it. After desperately trying to contact Thomas for an update, only to get no response in return, Mike discovered that Thomas was talking with other community members, but not to him. Mike eventually got in touch with him again sometime around January of the following year, and Thomas somehow convinced Mike to keep letting him work on the patch, only to then immediately ghost him again. Then in April of 2020, Thomas finally told Mike that he was giving up and said he wanted nothing to do with Saints Row or the community ever again. Apparently, he overestimated his skills, couldn't figure things out, and completely flaked Mike off. It almost cost Mike his job and killed the project right there. This was when Volition was already under a lot of stress after Agents of Mayhem flopped and they had to lay off a bunch of people. Mike was demoted as project manager and even had to hand over all the social media access for a while. Big drama behind the scenes. A lot of money and time was lost on this thing already. And to make matters worse, Mike's health was rapidly failing him, and he was scheduled to undergo surgery for stage 4 cancer. Yet, despite all the drama, the Saints Row 2 patch wasn't cancelled. With Thomas removed from the project, Volition roped in a previously employed Saints Row 2 systems engineer as his replacement. That's when progress was actually moving forward. Over a year later, we eventually got a build to playtest, but it was in really rough shape. Tons of graphical errors, crashes, you name it. These were some really rough playtests. I remember this one mission with Donnie would always crash as you went right under the bridge, or if you got anywhere near Stillwater U and the pyramid loaded. This heli assault activity gives me PTSD to this very day. Thankfully, most of these problems were fixed within a few months. There was still a lot of work that needed to be done, but for a while, things were beginning to look hopeful again. However, COVID-19 continued to cause a lot of complications during this time frame. The Saints Row 2 patch was no longer a priority, and it was all hands on deck for the Saints Row reboot instead. Except for Mike. He would stay working on the patch. The surgery for his cancer didn't go well. It left him partially paralyzed, deaf in one ear. They had to remove bone and skin off the half of his face, and as a result left him disformed and made it difficult for him to talk. Had he not undergone the surgery, the doctors estimated he only had 6 months to live. However, with the surgery, he was estimated to have 3 to 5 years, depending on how efficient the operation went. He initially didn't plan on going through with the surgery when informed of the toll it would take on the quality of life for his remaining years. But as Mike put it himself, he was so moved by all the messages of support and strength from the Saints Row community that it made him realize he shouldn't give up. He wanted to make everyone proud and fight to the end, no matter how difficult that journey would be. He wanted to make the world a slightly better place the best way he could in his capacity, and that meant continuing his work on the Saints Row 2 patch. He knew how happy this game made people, how much it meant to everyone in the Saints Row community. With all the strength he still had in this life, he was going to dedicate it to bring that happiness to everyone. That would be his legacy. We're only here for a short amount of time, but that game would live on and continue to bring happiness to all who played it for generations. That's what fixing this game meant to him. In spite of the toll that surgery took on him, he continued to work on the Saints Row 2 patch while in hospice throughout 2021. Sadly, Mike's health deteriorated over the next few months, and on August 25th, 2021, Mike Watson passed away. He worked on the Saints Row 2 patch until his dying day. And that's also when the build stopped coming. For those of us in the playtest group, it was complete radio silence. A lot of us realized that without Mike, we were left in the dark and this project wasn't going anywhere. No one reached out to us except to say that the studio was focused on the Saints Row reboot and work wouldn't continue on the patch until that was out. Then a year later, the Saints Row reboot dropped and, well, that was a thing. Then a year after the reboot was released and all the extended support on that was exhausted, Volition was finally free to continue their work on the patch. This time, it was a little bit complicated because their parent company, Embracer Group, had moved the studio from Deep Silver to Gearbox due to a long troubled history between the two behind the scenes. They weren't a good fit for each other, and the dwindling quality of games proved it. However, Deep Silver still holds all the rights to the Saints Row IP, and now had to technically outsource the work to Gearbox and Volition for things to continue. But it seemed like things were finally coming together after all this time. I was invited back for playtesting and asked to sign another NDA if I wanted to be involved. But I refused their offer. That NDA would place a gag order on me for 10 years, and that was way too long. I knew this story had to be told, because as a fan myself, I'd want to know the truth. Somebody has to tell the story. But at least I'd be leaving the project knowing that work was going to continue. And then Embracer closed Volition. Remember when I told you that THQ made some bad investments and had to sell off Volition? Yeah, well this time Embracer made some bad investments and they decided to cut their losses and close Volition for good. And now with them shut down, Deep Silver has to go through the process of transferring the remaining work to another studio. which isn't exactly on the top of their priorities. From what I've heard, they're really struggling to pick up where Mike left off. Deep Silver doesn't want to announce anything about the patch until the work for it is complete, but they can't exactly nail down how much work is left to budget for, and if it's even worth it after all this. The elephant in the room is that no one really believes a patch for a game that's over 15 years old is going to be worth the time and money. Tons of people are losing their job in the game industry with mass layoffs happening nearly every week, from Embracer no less. If money is a priority, then this patch is done for. And sadly, that's all I know. Only time can tell if it ever comes out, or if they'll cancel it. Personally, I think they're going to keep it in a perpetual state of development hell until it's quietly canceled or indefinitely postponed. Before Mike got sick, Saints Row 1 could have had a PC port. It was his next big project after releasing the patch. I even heard he got keyboard and mouse support working for it. He was also looking into reviving the multiplayer gang leaderboards, and of course porting Saints Row 1 and 2 to more systems. He wanted to remove the proprietary physics engine Havoc and release the source code of Saints Row 2 to the public. And of course down the line, remaster Saints Row 1 and 2 completely. When you consider all of this, and the fact that the Saints Row reboot was originally going to have the OG Saints conclude the deck storyline and have official mod support with developer-grade mod tools, this is the most tragic story in gaming I've ever personally witnessed. For those of you watching from outside the Saints Row community, all of this that I just mentioned would have solved 99% of every problem Saints Row fans have ever had with this series. I was trying to hold out on all this info until we got some good news, but it's probably never going to happen. And if this is really the end, I wanted to give you guys some closure to it all. This is truly the end of an era. Volition is gone, Deep Silver has control of Saints Row now, and what even is Saints Row anymore? As I reflect on my time in the Saints Row community, I've come to realize this is how it truly ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. But that doesn't mean I'm quitting YouTube. You guys are way too much fun. I love making this cracked out content for you guys, and we can always look forward to the next best thing. And besides, the classics never die. I still gotta finish my Saints Row 1 playthrough, and there's a lot more of the Saints Row 2 patch that I want to show you. Idle Ninja wouldn't want us to be sad about any of this. That man was so positive. I don't want his suffering to have been in vain, especially after all the pain he went through for us. And so that's why we can't give up on this patch. Let's raise awareness and work together as a community to show everyone how much this game means to us. That's the spirit of Gentlemen of the Row after all. I wanted to share this story as my personal goodbye to Mike Watson. He was one of the few positive people in my life for a while, especially when I really needed it. The courage he had to fight as hard as he did, while selflessly dedicating the remainder of his life for a project he would never live to see, is one of the most inspirational things I've seen, and I'll always remember him for it. It was a privilege to know him, even if it was only for a short time. The next time you play Saints Row 2, think of Idle Ninja. Think of Mike Watson. Carry his story in your heart, and have fun.